Lesson 43. God is my source. I cannot see apart from Him. Perception is not an attribute of God. His is the realm of knowledge. Yet He has created the Holy Spirit as the mediator between perception and knowledge. Without this link with God, perception would have replaced knowledge forever in your mind. With this link with God, perception will become so changed and so purified that it will lead to knowledge. That is its function as the Holy Spirit sees it. Therefore, that is its function in truth. In God, you cannot see. Perception has no function in God and does not exist. Yet in salvation, which is the undoing of what never was, perception has a mighty purpose. Made by the Son of God for an unholy purpose, it must become the means for the restoration of His holiness to His awareness. Perception has no meaning, yet does the Holy Spirit give it a meaning very close to God's. Healed perception becomes the means by which the Son of God forgives His brother and thus forgives Himself. You cannot see apart from God because you cannot be apart from God. Whatever you do in Him, because whatever you think with His mind. If vision is real, and it is real to the extent to which it shares the Holy Spirit's purpose, then you cannot see apart from God. 3 5-minute practice periods are required today, one as early and one as late as possible in the day. The third may be undertaken at the most convenient and suitable time that circumstances and readiness permit. At the beginning of these practice periods, repeat the idea for today to yourself with eyes open. Then glance around you for a short time, applying the idea specifically to what you see. 4 or 5 subjects for this phase of the practice period are sufficient. You might say, for example, God is my source. I cannot see this desk apart from Him. God is my source. I cannot see that picture apart from Him. Although this part of the exercise period should be relatively short, be sure that you select the subjects for this phase of practice indiscriminately, without self-directed inclusion or exclusion. For the second and longer phase, close your eyes, repeat today's idea again, and then let whatever relevant thoughts occur to you add to the idea in your own personal way. Thoughts such as, I see through the eyes of forgiveness. I see the world as blessed. The world can show me myself. I see my own thoughts, which are like God's. Any thought related more or less directly to today's idea is suitable. The thoughts need not bear any obvious relationship to the idea, but they should not be in opposition to it. If you find your mind wandering, if you begin to be aware of thoughts which are clearly out of accord with today's idea, or if you seem to be unable to think of anything, open your eyes, repeat the first phase of the exercise period, and then attempt the second phase again. Do not allow any protracted period to occur in which you become preoccupied with irrelevant thoughts. Return to the first phase of the exercises as often as necessary to prevent this. In applying today's idea in the shorter practice periods, the form may vary according to the circumstances and situations in which you find yourself during the day. When you are with someone else, for example, try to remember to tell him silently, God is my source. I cannot see you apart from Him. This form is equally applicable to strangers as it is to those you think are closer to you. In fact, try not to make distinctions of this kind at all. Today's ideas should also be applied throughout the day to various situations and events that may occur, particularly to those which seem to distress you in any way. For this purpose, apply the idea in this form. God is my source. I cannot see this apart from Him. If no particular subject presents itself to your awareness at the time, merely repeat the idea in its original form. Try today not to allow any long periods of time to slip by without remembering today's idea, and thus remembering your function. God is my source. I cannot see apart from Him. We've talked about before how God created us. And the Course says that we are ideas in the mind of God, that ideas can never leave their source. They cannot leave their source. What God creates is more and more of what He is. What He is love. What is love is real. What is real is eternal. So what God creates is eternal, cannot be changed, altered, abolished, diminished in any way. That includes you. So as an idea within His mind, you cannot leave His mind because you are eternal. He created you as a loving thought, a loving idea. You are eternally within His mind. You cannot leave. The first line in this lesson says, perception is not an attribute of God. We talked yesterday about the gifts of God, how those are the attributes of God that are inherently ours as children of God, that we have within us all of the attributes of God because He made us like Him, and that those are eternal. They cannot go away. They cannot be taken away. We can just forget to use them. Perception is not an attribute of God. It says God dwells in the realm of knowledge. And that is what is eternal. That is what is true. That is what is real. Perception is a product of the separation. Perception is a product of ego mind, therefore. Perception is another way of saying how we see things. Here in the world, we can have a misinformed perception, a misguided perception. We're still learning the lessons here that will lead us out of our wrong-minded perception, that wrong part of our mind. We still hear the unloving guide. We still hear the voice of the ego. And there is a way to see things differently. We ask the Holy Spirit to help us with our perception. When we are seeing things wrongly and we know it because we're uncomfortable, we are upset, then we ask that great mediator between perception and knowledge to show us how to see things differently, because in the world we want to be able to see as God would see, to think as God would think, which helps us get closer and closer to knowledge. In the world, we can see things based on the voice of love, the thinking of love, or the voice of lovelessness, the unloving voice, the thinking of fear. The Holy Spirit is the voice for God, the voice of love within us. The ego is the voice for fear, the voice of lovelessness within us. One will take us down a path of perception of love to God, towards knowledge, towards right perception, true perception. One will distract us from that true voice and lead us down a path of wrong-minded perception. The ego voice, the false guide that's leading us down the wrong-minded path of perception away from knowledge, away from truth, because it doesn't want you to go down that path. Remember, that path would lead to you not listening to it. That path would lead you to the truth of who you really are, and then you would never want to listen to it again, therefore it would have no power. So the ego is using your physical senses, it's using guilt, it's using unloving thought, it's using judgment, it's using fear to lead you astray down the path of wrong-minded perception. It's really easy for us to be lured down that path of wrong perception with our physical senses instead of using our spiritual senses, what we know to be true. You cannot see apart from God because you cannot be apart from God. Perception is not an attribute of God. Seeing is not an attribute of God, but it's a tool that we use here in the world to get back to right-minded perception. You have to be in the right state of mind before you can return to knowledge. You can't just go from where you are now to knowledge. It's too big of a leap. That's why the Holy Spirit is here to lead us up the ladder in small, bite-sized steps, because otherwise the steps would be too far apart for us to actually make progress. Vision is His gift to us. The way to see differently is laid out clearly for us. Using the Holy Spirit, inviting the Holy Spirit to mediate, to decide for God, for love, for us, to decide to listen to that voice and go down the path towards pure perception, is God's gift to us that cannot be taken away. It's always available to us. That was yesterday's lesson. So in this world, we can learn to be still and listen, be still and know that there is a path to pure perception that will help lead us out of the chaos that we are currently perceiving, the wrong-minded, unloving perception. The last line in this lesson says to keep this idea at the forefront of your mind, basically, to remember it so that you remember your function. Your primary responsibility as a miracle worker in the world is to think as God would think, to see as God would see, to love as God would love, to extend that in the world. And it says that the function of perception is to become so changed and so purified into a loving, right-minded perception that it leads you and everyone, when you're healed, you're not healed alone, closer to knowledge. That is its function as the Holy Spirit sees it, it says. And that is your function, to help lead others closer and closer to knowledge by expressing love in the world. See you tomorrow.